Good morning. My name is Jessica Baird Holtz, and I'm going to walk through the mini EdTPA portfolio I put together. It's quite a package, so I hope this won't take too long, but I do not teach in a specific school, and I know we don't put in the specific location, but I'm going to walk through the context for learning. Middle school is preferred for me. I thought it was super fun, so rural setting was also fun for me. So they're out in the community of mostly farm area. Teaching biology, of course, because science is my background. It is a one-year class since it is a fundamental course. And then the way that I chose to organize this is it's a 90-minute day. They don't have much of anything else. There's no group tracking or anything like that. And they didn't have a textbook. Most of the classes that I've been in, they haven't used a specific textbook, so I just followed this format as well. Each class has whiteboards on each side except for one side with windows. There is a projector screen and the capability of running audio and visual. Because it is a science classroom, there is a sink at the back to help with experimentation and things like that. We are specifically looking in a smaller sort of class, so I picked 12. I know this isn't typical or common, and I organized it based off of a lot of percentages have higher amounts of females versus males. So there are 2 IEPs. They basically need added instruction or refocusing, and then there's 1 English language learner that either needs pre-teaching of those words or word bank and a translator. No struggling readers in this situation. So I included my lesson plan model. We were talking about forces, wanting to basically study what different types of forces. The standard is 8.PS2.3. It's physical science, 8th grade, wanting to create a demonstration of an object in motion and describe the position, force, and direction of the object. Goals here are for them to be introduced to what it is, how it works, and then the properties that take place around it. Objectives we've gone over before, but we'll review. Students will be able to correctly define what force is, verbally describing the movement of an object to an accuracy of 100%. They move up to explaining with 90% accuracy the differences between the static, gravitational, and standard forces. And then finally, they have to create their own demonstration of a moving object and accurately describe the varying forces taking place by verbal or oral presentation, either one, to an accuracy of 90%. The whole point of this is to gain an understanding of what force is first, move into looking at it, observing it, analyzing it, and then taking that a step further and asking them to create and produce a situation and then analyze their own situation and put it all together. So a majority of this lesson plan walks through that. They're asking questions like, does force act upon every object? Is each force the same? Do we continue moving or do we stop when we're in movement? That sort of thing. Different misconceptions that they can come under is that gravity is the only force that is acting on all of our situations in life. I believe this is a fundamental process that we can look at and see and visualize around us. So I think that no matter where we're at in the world, we could look outside and watch different forces. So that's why I also created the lesson with that intent in mind. My design is 15 minutes with a launch, watching a video of a roller coaster. What better way to look at force other than having a bird's eye view of being on a roller coaster? That is, I'm hoping, something that would capture their attention. Having a bell ringer, going into describing what they think it is, getting their mind focused on what we're about to talk about, and do they think that all forces are the same. At this point in time, I would also have them do that pre-assessment quiz, just so I have data on what do they know, what do they not know, sort of thing. Instruction would be 20 minutes. That's where we would cover the PowerPoint, go over what force is, ask questions, kind of dig into the meat of it. But then we move into a higher situation where they have structured practice and application. How do we do that? Well, we would want to take time to look around, apply what we think force is to things around us. We would also have our vocabulary, what I call vocabulary room moment. They'd have different groups and have vocabulary flashcards that they'd have to associate with different descriptions so that they are getting that in their mind and focusing on that. Closure. Closure would be doing the facilitated group discussion over what the material was in class. So throughout this whole thing, I do want to integrate that thumbs up, thumbs down of how do you feel about this? Are we doing okay? If there's like the majority of classes feeling good with the material, we'll continue to proceed. And if they're not, then we'll rearrange certain things. I designed this class with a couple things. So we obviously are going through the PowerPoint of force, but we're also working on vocabulary room and just gaining a perspective of the material. But I also am trying to work up this lesson to the point where we can work on the project presentation. It may span the course of a couple days, depending on how well they pick up this material, but the project itself would be, let me see if I can get to that. I'm going to fast forward here, go all the way down to the materials that I created. Here's the PowerPoint. Pause for the presentation. PowerPoint has all of the information, so we have the standard, we have the objectives so that they can look at that, and then I can statements that are based on the objectives. The movie for the YouTube with the roller coaster, and then they'd have the pre-assessment, bell ringer to get their mind on what we're doing. Force, I would put way more insert more information here. I just didn't have it for this particular session. Vocabulary room, and then the force project, which we'll go over here in a minute. I would also integrate an exit ticket. So force project. Submit a topic or idea that you believe captures movement. That can include varying forces they've discussed. They need to demonstrate the moving of an object. They need to clearly label and define all forces. And then they need to include at least 2 forces with that. So they're going to do either an oral presentation or a written presentation with that. So with that, I would have a rubric indicating that they need to have the specific syntax and discourse included in that, looking for scientific jargon and the specific terminology, using certain vocab terms, using, I used this particular medium or scenario because, and backing up their statement with the why. So that's something that science is heavily focused on, and I believe that that's something that we can integrate in this particular lesson. So I also created these vocabulary cards. These are cards that they would put together. Those are the terminology terms, and then these are the definitions for those. Moving on to the bell ringer, this just is what I would put for them to complete in their science journals. Moving forward, exit ticket, so they could do this on their own paper, they could do this on this. I want them to describe what force is. We're kind of just using repetition there to get that in their mind. I want them to summarize what they just heard in the lesson, and then for my own feedback, I want them to indicate 2 things they liked and one thing that they would change about it. Pre-check is the pre-assessment, so it's multiple choice for different forces, things that could show misconceptions, but it's also working up to using scientific disciplines to back up claims. Going into planning commentary, so basically all of my lesson was designed around providing a zone of proximal development with Vygotsky's theory, wanting to create a situation where they're able to wrestle with the material, but work out that wrestling with scaffolding and classroom monitoring by myself. Hopefully they can also use some other integrations like Bandura's watching others and learning from that. So differential group instructions, I would hope would help with that. Moving further, all of this was talking about integrating different learning concepts for different learners that are in different areas. So one would be the IEP learners need constant redirection and refocusing. So I would just make sure to focus on those guys and have them be sure that they're attentive to the lesson and on task with what needs to be done. The English language learner, I would need to make sure that I help him a little bit more as well with having the material pre-taught, let him have the word bank before the lesson so that he can kind of gain what's what and kind of have a step up in that direction before we hit that lesson itself. So the scientific language here that we're looking at, I really am focusing on justifying with evidence, but I'm also having them focus on analyzing as well. So they're looking at a specific situation, they are analyzing that situation, and then I want them to justify with evidence. So continuing on through the instruction, this is our assessment commentary, which I took all of the data. This shows their pre and post, so I would add that pre-assessment and do it again at the end of class as well so that they have that. The blue is your pre, how well they did. The orange is the post. The majority of the class shows an increase in their assessments, so it shows supporting that the class learned something. This particular instance on this graph shows that the majority of class, I'd say about 2/3 had an improvement, whereas the 1/3 did not. So that 1/3 would need to have that lesson retaught or supplemented in some sort of way, which I go into further detail in this commentary. I also broke down the questions that I used on the assessment and which objectives it's associated with. I believe that's great for indicating how you design your lesson. And then I also didn't have any student work samples for this particular scenario because I don't work in a classroom, but I went ahead and focused on 3 particular students, 2 of which are associated with the 2/3 of the class that did well, and then 1 is an actual IEP learner that I would need to help and modify their instruction to help them with where they're at in the class. So continuing on, we've got evidence of language and that type of use by Webb's depth of knowledge, associating the fact that we're analyzing and using higher level thinking, but wanting them to use that different discourse and syntax in that particular scenario. So that rubric would help with that, making sure that they understand what's expected of them as well. Informing instruction, all of this is my analysis of going back to how they did in class, what seemed to work, and then looking at how they would need to be modified for the future. My hope is that this lesson would work, and I think it would overall all, but it really depends on the learners and where they are at, and provided their feedback, I would need to modify accordingly. So that's my lesson, and I hope I hit all the main topics, but I think that's everything. So hopefully this will work, and good luck to everybody. Thank you.